record here or there or something. So I think he's cooking pretty good. I'd like to eat some of the stuff that he's cooking, so.
Well, that's not an upset. Andy tends to like to eat things that almost anyone is cooking. But in this case, Mahomes has just been spectacular. And if you look at his numbers up against Aaron Rodgers' numbers this year, as these two seem to have separated themselves in the MVP conversation, you see all the numbers on your screen there. This feels like a two-horse race going down the final quarter of the season. And so, Chris Canty, I start with you. If you were to cast an MVP vote right now, who gets it?
I'm going to give it to Aaron Rodgers, and let me say this. If I was starting an NFL team, I would pick Pat Mahomes over everybody else. But the way that Aaron Rodgers is playing the quarterback position right now, you got to give that man his props. 36 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions. He's a machine out there. And the sequence that you saw in the first half to Davante Adams down there at the goal line, he tried to get it to him on the smoke, got down to the 1, couldn't get it in on that 3rd down pass, goes right back to him on 4th down, and you see that great pitch and catch right there. No tandem in the National Football League is doing it better than these two, and I think Aaron Rodgers can ride that to an MVP.
Okay, fair enough. I think Tyreek Hill had 200 yards in the first quarter of the week before, but that's a whole other conversation. Greg, let me come to you. Who gets the MVP vote right now?
If the MVP went to the best player, it'd go to Patrick Mahomes. But it's the most valuable player, and because of the supporting cast that Patrick Mahomes has at his disposal every single week, I gotta lean towards Aaron Rodgers. The guy had Davante Adams out of the lineup for a little bit, and his wide receivers are kind of a cast of characters, not bad players by any stretch of the imagination, but Allen Lazard, Valdez-Scantling, Robert Tonyan, we're not talking about a who's who of all pros here. Solid players nonetheless, but Aaron Rodgers is bringing out the best in each and every one of those guys and has throughout the course of the season. So he is the most valuable player at the moment, but the most talented player still, unequivocally, is Patrick Mahomes.
I heard the sighs. Jeff Saturday, what do you think?
Y'all are both high. This is a ridiculous conversation all the way around. The most valuable player, and we're going to say Pat Mahomes is not the most valuable. Why? They've lost one game in the last, 15, 16 games. We're talking about, Aaron Rodgers doing it with less. Matt LaFleur didn't think they needed it anymore, and they're continuing to handle business. Think about how well Patrick Mahomes played last week. How many throws he makes to keep his team in it. Think about how many times he's brought this football team back. He's the most valuable player on the best football team. You can't penalize him and give, points to Aaron Rodgers because his receiving crew isn't as good as what Kansas City has. Whatever he has, he's taking full advantage of it. That's the best player. You both just said if you had a first pick, you would pick him, and if he's the best player, you would pick him, and then you go, no, but it's Aaron Rodgers. That's absolutely absurd. I don't know what's going on where both of y'all are, but it's ridiculous y'all both high on this.
Look, I've said it before. They should just rename the award the Patrick Mahomes Award because he's going to be the MVP for the next 15 years and give it to Rodgers this year and give it to whomever you want going forward. That is legitimately what they should do. And someday they will because, like most geniuses, I won't be fully appreciated until long after my time. As we continue here, I'll put together a little feature for you here, taking a look at some questionable teams and deciding if they're good or not. And our incredibly creative staff, the same people who bring you a wood-based pun every single week when Damian Woody is on, came up with this. Are they good? That's the name of the feature. So let's take a look at some of these teams and decide if they are or not good. We start with you, Canty. The Ravens, are they good?
As much as it pains me to say this because I'm a former Raven, I got to say it. They're not good, and they're not going to make the playoffs. I'm surprised to see the Baltimore Ravens offense regress the way that it has. Last year, they led the league in passing touchdowns, and their identity was running the football. They set the single-season rushing record for a team. This year, the rushing game hasn't been there, and they haven't been able to have the complement of the passing game. Because they don't have the identity, that's going to keep them on the outside of the playoffs.
All right, Jeff Saturday, the Raiders, are they good?
They are good. Listen, they come to the East 2 weeks in a row. They lay an egg against the Falcons. They barely squeak out, but this is a good football team. They beat the Saints, the Browns, the Chiefs. It's an inconsistent football team, but this is a team fully capable of winning and getting in the playoffs and making some noise. This is still a good football team, Greeny.
Right now, they're the number 8 seed in the AFC. Hey, Dan Graziano, the Giants, are they good?
Greeny, this is not something we're used to saying lately, but right now, at this moment, I think the Giants are good. I mean, they've won 4 in a row. They just went into Seattle and beat the Seahawks, kind of pushed them around a little bit. I was at that game. I'm standing in the front row at the end, waiting to do our post-game interview. Logan Ryan comes running off the field to the locker room going, "You believe yet? You believe yet?" And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, they just beat Seattle. Why not? Why aren't they good?
I think that's a good point, a good take. And I'll tell you what, are they good as a keeper? Sometimes the simplest questions are actually the best. So let's talk about the NFC East a little bit here. We showed you Washington, the football team, knocking off Pittsburgh yesterday. We see the Giants go out to Seattle and knock off the Seahawks without their starting quarterback, Daniel Jones. Jeff Saturday, who wins the NFC East?
The New York Giants. And listen, physical. Like if you describe this football team in the last 4 weeks, that's what they are. They want to run downhill at you. They lose Saquon Barkley, still doesn't deter them. This is who they're going to be. Bring tight ends in. Ingram, he's willing to stick his face in there and participate in blocking. The offensive line is getting progressively better each week. And think about, they beat Seattle with Colt McCoy, again, throwing for 100 yards. Why? Because they're not afraid to keep running the ball. They're going to control it and then flip it over. Defensively, no different. Be physical, be nasty. That's defined this football team. Give Joe Judge a ton of credit for getting this team in order.
Since they were 0-5, they've gone 5-2, and their losses were by a combined 3 points. But you mentioned when they were 0-5, they beat the Washington football team in a moment that kind of turned their season around. And Chris Canty, you do a talk show locally in New York, so you're there day in, day out to see it. That moment might have changed everything in that division.
Absolutely, because if the Washington football team and the Giants finish tied with the amount of wins at the end of the season, the Giants have the tiebreaker based on the head-to-head sweep that they had in the 2-game season series. So going back to that decision that Ron Rivera made, you wonder why he did it in that moment, because they had all the momentum in that Week 6 matchup at that moment in the game. If you go into overtime, maybe you could be talking about the Washington football team pulling out a win. But instead, he went for 2, and Ron gambled, and he lost, and it could come back to bite him at the end of this year.
Yeah, to be clear, an extra point in that situation would have tied it. The game would have gone to overtime, and we would have seen what would have happened. In that case, they went for the 2 and the win. They didn't get it, as you saw. So, Graziano, what do you think? As we look at this much maligned division, these two teams bringing a little respectability to it, who do you think has the edge?
I think it's the Giants because of the tiebreaker, but I mean, look, this could go either way on any week because, I mean, yesterday you wouldn't have thought we were sitting here saying Washington had beaten Pittsburgh. You would have thought the Giants would be in command, but instead they keep pace. So, interesting race. But the most important thing is, look, if you had said to me a week ago it's going to be Seattle and Pittsburgh in the Super Bowl, I couldn't have said you were crazy. And they just both lost to NFC East teams. Those could be tough teams to play in January, whichever one gets in.
Clearly, the division champion is going to host a playoff game in January, and right now, no one wants to go to either of their buildings.